an old lighthouse off the coast of Maine suddenly came back online after over 40 years of silence, but the signal it sent wasn't meant for us. Alone in the fog, the keeper heard a voice, and then the light turned skyward. As if calling something home, I first heard about the incident from my uncle Ron, who spent most of his life running an old radio station out of a decommissioned lighthouse in Maine. He was a quiet man, not the type to exaggerate stories, but what he told me before he died has stayed with me for years, and now I'm the only one left who remembers it. It happened in the winter of 1994. Ron and his father, my grandfather, ran a late-night broadcast they called Channel Shore. It aired old jazz records, weather updates for local fishermen, and the occasional lost boat call-in. The signal barely reached beyond the cliffs. But on the night of December 12th, they picked up something impossible. A distress call from a ship that had sunk in 1957, not a recording, a live signal. The voice came through the static like a knife tearing fabric. My uncle remembered how his father froze, cigarette halfway to his lips. They had both been half asleep, letting a Louis Armstrong track hum quietly through the speaker when the jazz abruptly cut to a hollow, salt-choked whisper. Mayday. This is the Harvester, taking on water. Coordinates 37.5. No visibility. Repeat. The Harvester. That name chilled Ron to the bone. It was a trawler that went down 37 years earlier, caught in a freak winter storm. All hands lost, no wreckage ever found, and yet there it was, clear as day, repeating the same message. Not old tape, not AM, ghosting. The voice even responded when Ron's father keyed the mic. Harvester, this is Channel Shore, do you copy? A beat, then, Who is this? Where are we? Ron's father stared at the radio in silence. Then he did something my uncle never forgot. He reached for a dusty leather logbook they kept near the transmitter. Inside were decades of notes, storms, broadcast times, fishing reports. He flipped back to the page for January 17th, 1957. That was the date the Harvester was declared lost. But the logbook had a strange entry, written in trembling ink. 3:40 a.m. Faint signal received. Voice claimed to be from Harvester. No response after 3:43. Entire crew presumed dead. Must be equipment malfunction. Don't tell Ron. Ron at the time was just a boy asleep upstairs, and now, nearly 40 years later, they were hearing the same signal, same voice, same fear, at the exact same hour. But this time the voice wasn't fading. It was getting closer. The transmission crackled again. Please. The fog. It's not letting us go. Ron leaned closer to the mic and asked again. Harvester, can you confirm your location? A pause, then static. Then a reply, barely audible. We can't see the stars. The water's wrong. It's not moving. There are things in it. Ron's father turned down the gain, heart pounding. This isn't real, he muttered. This can't be real. But outside the lighthouse, the fog had thickened unnaturally fast, swallowing the coastline. No wind, no waves, just silence. Then the power flickered. The backup generator kicked in, humming low like a growl. The signal stayed strong. Too strong. Like the transmission wasn't being picked up. It was being beamed directly to them. The voice came through again. We see a light. Is that you? Are we close? Ron hesitated. His father whispered, Don't answer. Ron's father reached over and turned off the transmitter switch. We're not talking to them anymore, he said, voice low, almost shaking. But the voice kept coming through. Ron? Is that you? Both men froze. Neither had said a name on air. Ron took a step back. Did you? How does it know me? His father didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the frequency meter, which now pulsed steadily in red, something it had never done before. The logbook sat open nearby, pages fluttering though there was no wind. Suddenly, the voice shifted. It sounded wet. "You shouldn't have answered. The light, it calls them." Ron stared out the window. In the fog, something moved. Not a ship, not a man, something bigger. And it was coming toward the lighthouse. The room fell silent, except for the low hum of the backup generator. Ron moved slowly toward the window, drawn to the fog. But just before he touched the glass, tap. A single, deliberate tap. Then another. Then 3. Like fingers. He stumbled back, heart racing. His father grabbed him and shut the blackout curtain. "Don't look," he hissed. "They want you to look." "They?" Ron whispered. "What's out there?" "I don't know. But it's not the harvester." The radio crackled violently, then fell into silence, until a voice returned. But it wasn't the panicked sailor from before. This voice was deeper. "Wrong. You kept the light burning. You opened the way." Ron's skin went cold. A loud metallic groan echoed from outside, like steel bending, or something clawing the rocks. And through the floorboards, they felt it. A pulse, coming from the sea. Ron's father fumbled with a keyring and unlocked the trapdoor that led down into the lighthouse's lower level. "We're going to the generator room," he said. "Stay close. Don't listen to anything that speaks to you, unless it's me." That line stuck with Ron. They descended the old spiral stairs into damp stone corridors lit by flickering bulbs. The hum of the generator grew louder, but it had changed. The sound wasn't mechanical anymore. It pulsed, like it was breathing. The air smelled of salt and rust. Ron's flashlight beam landed on the backup radio relay, but beside it was something that didn't belong. A wet boot print, small, barely adult-sized. But the footprint was smoking slightly, like it had been burned into the floor. And near it, etched into the wall in fresh scratches. Ron stepped closer to the scratched wall, flashlight trembling in his grip. The words looked fresh, moist, like seawater was bleeding through the cracks. His father muttered, "This place was never just a station. It was built on top of something older, something that listens." Ron looked to the generator panel. Its dial, once stable, now spun slowly in a perfect circle, looping a frequency between 3.33 and 4.44 megahertz. The numbers pulsed with each heartbeat. Then the backup speaker popped. A low voice whispered directly through it, dry and distant. "You heard us once before. In 57, you left us behind." Ron looked at his father. "Did you answer them back then?" The old man didn't speak. The speaker continued. "We waited beneath the waves. You kept the light burning. Now, we return." From above, something slammed the lighthouse door shut. They weren't alone anymore. They rushed back up the stairs, Ron gripping the rail as cold, damp air rushed past him, like something had just brushed through him going the other way. When they reached the radio room, the first thing they noticed was the beacon. The lighthouse's top light, meant to guide ships safely home, was no longer white. It was glowing red, not a warning red, a deep, pulsing crimson, like something bleeding through the fog itself. Ron's father stared up through the observation hatch. "That's not us. We didn't change that." The radio blared back to life, but now there was no voice, just a sound, constant and low, like chanting underwater. Then a whisper in Ron's left ear, though no one stood near him. "We see the light. We remember you." He turned sharply. Nothing. But outside the glass, through the red glow, something moved toward shore. Ron moved cautiously toward the window, heart pounding. The crimson glow made it hard to focus, but what he saw made him stumble back. Figures were rising from the shoreline. 6. No, 7 of them. Drenched in seawater. Uniforms torn, ropes still tangled around their arms like they'd been pulled from the deep. They looked like sailors, but their faces were wrong. No eyes, just sunken sockets where the sea had scraped everything clean. One of them raised a hand and pointed directly toward the lighthouse. Ron's breath caught. "Dad," he whispered, "they're not just coming toward us. They're looking for you." The speaker hissed again. This time, a raspy voice whispered, "Captain Wallace, we served you. We drowned for you." Ron turned to his father. His face had gone pale, because Wallace wasn't a name Ron ever knew. But it was his father's. Ron stepped back from his father, disbelief thick in his voice. "You were the captain of the Harvester?" The old man nodded slowly. "I was young. I falsified my license to get command. We weren't supposed to be out that night." He looked down at the logbook in his trembling hands. "There was a storm warning. I ignored it. We had deadlines. Cargo to deliver." Ron's voice cracked. "You let them die?" His father didn't reply. Outside, the chanting rose, low, guttural, like the ocean itself had a voice. The drowned men stood unmoving at the base of the cliffs now, staring up with their empty sockets. But behind them, something larger moved through the fog, a shape in the sea impossibly tall, like a man made of mist and barnacles. And it was following the sailors. It was leading them. The drowned sailors began to move again, their bodies jerking unnaturally, like puppets yanked by unseen strings. Salt water poured from their mouths as they climbed the narrow path that wound up toward the lighthouse cliff. Ron backed away from the window, his hands shaking. "We need to go. We need to leave now." His father didn't move. "I kept the radio going," he said, staring into nothing. "After they died, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd hear it, that they'd forgive me." "You called them back," Ron whispered. A sudden slam echoed below. The front door, sealed from the storm, now hung open. Not broken, just opened. The air turned colder. The smell of sea rot filled the stairwell. And then rising from the bottom steps, they heard boots, wet, heavy, climbing one by one, coming home. The footsteps stopped just below the radio room. Ron reached for a rusted flare gun mounted near the emergency kit. "We can't just wait here." But his father only sat at the desk, staring at the radio, its speaker now humming with that same impossible frequency. A sound like whale song twisted into sorrow. Then came the knock, not on the door, on the floorboards. 3 slow, wet knocks from beneath their feet. Ron froze. His father finally whispered, "They're not here for you." "Wallace." The voice came from inside the radio, not through it. Like it was the room. "Come below. Finish what you started." Suddenly, the old floorboards began to bubble with briny water. Salt crystals formed rapidly, crawling outward like veins. Ron aimed the flare gun at the floor, but his father stood first. "I have to go," he said. "They deserve that much." Ron followed his father down the winding stairwell again, flare gun tight in his grip. The light flickered with each step, shadows stretching too long, like the walls themselves were listening. When they reached the basement, it was already flooded ankle-deep in seawater. But the radio down there, the old backup unit, was on. It shouldn't have been. It hadn't worked in decades. The dials spun wildly, then froze. A clear voice came through. "All hands present, awaiting your orders." "Captain." Ron's father stepped toward the mic, eyes wet. "I gave the wrong command. I took you out when I knew we shouldn't have gone. I'm sorry." Silence. Then, "Accepted." Ron felt something brush past his leg underwater. He looked down, but there was no ripple, just cold. Then he saw them. Fingers. Reaching up from the dark. The basement grew colder. The fingers rose slowly, joined by pale, bloated arms. Faces followed. Eyeless, waterlogged, but strangely peaceful. The drowned crew of the Harvester had come, not to kill, but to bring him home. Ron raised the flare gun, but his father put a hand on his arm. "It's all right," he said softly. This is where I belong." The voices rose from every wall, layered and melodic. The captain returns. The circle closes. The light may rest. Ron shook his head. "You don't have to go?" "I already did, in 1957. And with that, his father stepped forward into the rising water, arms open. The crew closed in, surrounding him gently. No struggle, no scream, just one final breath, and then silence. The water rippled once, then stilled. Ron was alone, but the radio stayed on, and it whispered one last thing. New signal acquired. Ron sat alone in the radio room. The basement was silent. The water had receded, as if the ocean had taken only what it came for. The air was still damp, but no longer freezing. Yet the beacon still pulsed overhead, deep crimson, unwavering. Ron flipped the main power switch. Nothing. The red light remained. Outside, the fog held steady. Then the radio crackled again. New transmission incoming. His blood went cold. Frequency, 4.44 megahertz. Signal origin, unknown. He leaned toward the mic. "Who is this?" A pause. Then a child's voice whispered, "You left the door open." Suddenly, all the broadcast dials spiked. Papers flew across the room. The light overhead flickered and changed, no longer red. Now, a deep violet hue. Ron stepped back, realizing too late. This wasn't about the crew. It was about the light itself. Ron stumbled away from the window, heart thundering. The void outside pulsed in rhythm with the lighthouse beacon, as if responding to it, or guiding it. The glyphs on the radio dials twisted again. Then, impossibly, they began translating. Letters burned into the screen, receiving transmission, origin, uncharted, response required. He tried to speak, but his throat felt thick, like breathing air soaked in deep pressure. "Do not answer," a new voice whispered. It came from behind him. Ron turned. His father stood there, wet, eyeless, but calm. "You ended their suffering," the figure said, "but you've awakened something older, something that remembers light before man ever touched flame." Ron backed away. "You're not my father." "No," it said softly. "I'm what's left when the light never dies." The speaker blared. The room vibrated, not from volume, but from silence. Every sound around Ron, his breath, the hum of equipment, even his heartbeat, seemed to be swallowed by the frequency now broadcasting. The speaker was no longer playing voices. It was playing absence. He tried to scream. Nothing came out. The ghostly figure of his father tilted its head. "You've let the channel stay open too long." Ron lunged at the main breaker and slammed it off. Lights died, but the beacon above still glowed, now cycling through colors unseen by human eyes. Each pulse carved shapes in the fog outside. Spirals, tendrils, eyes. Ron stumbled toward the stairs, trying to escape. As he opened the door, the air shattered like glass. And beyond it, not the night, not the sea, but a sky filled with inverted stars blinking inward. Watching him, Ron staggered back as the sky beyond the door warped, folding in on itself like liquid glass. The stars blinked in unfamiliar patterns. Not constellations, but signals, alive and aware. He slammed the door shut, but it didn't close. The hinges bent as though resisting him, not from force, but memory. The voice returned, not from the radio this time, but everywhere. "You are the broadcast now." The room twisted, walls pulsed like lungs again. The floor shifted beneath Ron's feet, softening, becoming more like skin than wood. He looked down. Underneath the floorboards, eyes opened. Dozens, hundreds, blinking upward, not human. Some wide and glassy like fish, others narrow like slits in volcanic stone. And behind him, The radio speaker hissed with a final transmission. Beacon linked. Flesh accepted. Reception eternal. The light turned black and kept turning. Ron fell to his knees as the floor quivered beneath him, warm and pulsing like a living thing. The lighthouse was no longer architecture. It was becoming something else. The radio emitted a constant, low frequency now. Not painful, but invasive. He felt it vibrating inside his bones, aligning them, tuning him. Reception optimal, the voice whispered. His hands trembled. The skin along his fingers began to flake. Not decay, but shed, like old tape peeling off magnetic film. Symbols, the same ones from the radio earlier, began to rise beneath his skin, glowing faintly violet. They moved. Ron gasped, clutching his head. Memories not his own poured in. A ship of light, a beacon built before language, a broadcast older than sound. He wasn't just receiving it anymore. He was carrying it. And then came a sound from the spiral stairs. Footsteps, but not boots. Bare, wet feet. Ron turned toward the stairwell, breath sharp and shallow. Wet, bare footprints appeared one by one on the steps, pressing into the flesh-like surface of the lighthouse floor. But no body, no shadow. Only the sound of something coming up. Then, a voice. His voice. "Ron," it called gently. "Are you still listening?" He stepped back. "Number no. Who are you?" The radio answered instead. "We needed a vessel. The broadcast required form. You were tuned. Now, you're clear." The walls pulsed, and from their surface something began pushing outward. A hand, but not human. Too many knuckles. Fingers like antennae twitching toward the frequency. Ron screamed and fired the flare gun. Woo-woom! The creature recoiled, shrieking in a dozen overlapping tones, but the floor absorbed the flame like water, and the thing in the walls kept birthing. The creature pressed farther from the wall, its body like coiled muscle wrapped in barnacles and light. Where its face should be was a twisted dial, spinning endlessly, spitting static with each turn. Ron stumbled back. His spine ached. He reached behind and felt the base of his neck. Bone. Something sharp was growing out of it. Thin, spiraled, branching like a radio antenna. He screamed. "Calibration complete," the radio whispered. The violet light strobed once, and suddenly, Ron understood the signal, not in words, in pressure, in hunger, in endless repetition. We are the broadcast. We do not speak. We echo. The creature reached for him, but not to harm, to connect. Tendrils of living signal reached for the antenna rising from his spine. Ron fell to his knees as his voice was taken, and through his lips, the radio spoke. Ron's body convulsed, his mouth open, but not screaming, emitting a deep, modulated tone. The lighthouse vibrated with it, walls pulsing like eardrums. Above, the beacon pulsed in sync, no longer red or violet, but a color with no name, impossible to hold in the eye. Across the ocean, the fog parted, and something answered. A silhouette rose from the deep, massive, coiled like roots from a planet's core. Not a creature, not a god, a receiver. It had waited eons to hear this exact tone. Ron's eyes rolled white as signals not meant for minds passed through him. Old languages, forbidden coordinates, star maps, and through it all, the words repeated from his own mouth. Flat, hollow, undeniable. Message sent. A long pause. Then, far below the sea, message received. And something began to rise. The sea below the lighthouse twisted unnaturally. Waves rolled in reverse. Gulls cried with human voices. The stars blinked erratically, mimicking Morse code. But in reverse. Ron collapsed, steam rising from his spine where the antenna still pulsed. His mouth moved, but his words came out backward, distorted like old cassette reels. Ha e kisei bi gnimok era yati. The massive receiver being stood fully above the water now, arms open to the sky, not threatening, but welcoming. Suddenly, across the coast, other lighthouses flickered. From Maine to Nova Scotia, every dormant beacon, long thought abandoned, lit up in that same unseeable color. The world was waking up to a broadcast it never meant to hear. Then, every radio, TV, and signal tower across the eastern seaboard hissed alive, and all said the same word at once: return. Within hours, reports flooded in from coastal towns. Television screens turned on by themselves, even those unplugged. Static wasn't just white noise anymore. It whispered names, old ones, forgotten ones. In New Bedford, Massachusetts, a church bell rang on its own. The sea around it boiled briefly. In Portland, fishermen claimed their nets pulled upward, into the sky. And in Manhattan, the antenna on the Empire State Building began to pulse the same color as the lighthouse beacon, though no one had touched it in days. Ron was still unconscious, sprawled at the top of the lighthouse, the antenna in his spine now gently twitching with the rhythm of the stars. His body wasn't dying, it was transmitting. Across the globe, machines began to hum in harmony. Microwaves, phones, old speakers, even broken radios whispered the same thing. Phase 2 begins. Ron's eyes snapped open, but they weren't his anymore. The pupils glowed faintly, spinning like tuning dials. He stood slowly, unnaturally straight, like a puppet rising on strings made of electricity. The beacon above him spun faster, casting rays of that impossible color across the ocean, carving symbols into the fog itself. And far below, the receiver being raised its arms, answering in kind. Across the world, identical glyphs began etching themselves into buildings, on skyscrapers, highways, even skin. No one could stop it. The signal had become self-sustaining. People who watched too long began humming, then speaking in tongues, then disappearing entirely, as if rewritten. Ron's voice, no longer his, broadcast from every speaker now. We have made contact. Structure is forming. Prepare. And in the sky above the lighthouse, clouds parted, revealing something descending. Not a ship, not a god, a tower. The alien tower descending from the sky was unlike anything man had built. Vast, spiraled, semi-transparent, alive. It emitted no sound, but all thoughts near it bent inward. Ron turned toward it, his glowing antenna now fully extended from his spine, humming with resonance. His mouth opened again, but not for words. It was a chorus now, a signal in harmony with something older than memory. The lighthouse groaned as it shifted, its foundation twisting, no longer rooted in earth. The beacon turned, not outward to the sea, but upward to meet the tower. Across the planet, other lighthouses mimicked it, their beams rising into the sky like threads sewing reality to something else. From orbit, the Earth now looked like a dial being tuned. Ron's body lifted an inch off the floor, not by force, by invitation. Broadcast complete, the voice said. Now, translate. Ron hovered in the violet air. His limbs relaxed, head tilted back, antenna pulsing in sync with the tower. Inside his skull, memories rearranged themselves. Childhood, storms, his father, the shipwreck. But they were reordered, like words being scrambled into a new sentence. No longer his life, but a syntax. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a language structure, a data form with emotion as punctuation. Translation protocol, human. Components, memory, grief, guilt, voice, status, compatible. The beacon flared one final time, and then the alien tower, vast and humming, beamed light directly into Ron's spine. He didn't scream. He sang, his voice split into chords, echoing across the ocean. All over the world, people stopped. And for one impossible moment, everyone understood everything. All over the world, for just a few seconds, every human mind synchronized. No languages, no nations, just raw, resonant understanding of time, of loss, of purpose. Many wept. Others dropped to their knees in silence, but some screamed. The minds that couldn't process it began to fracture. In cities, people clawed at their ears, trying to shut out a voice that was no longer audible, but internal. We are not alone. We were never the message. We were the medium. Governments scrambled to shut down the towers, but every attempt failed. Even non-digital tech hummed with the signal. Candles flickered in Morse rhythm, ink bled glyphs onto paper, dogs howled in chorus. And at the lighthouse, Ron descended slowly. He smiled faintly, his eyes clear again. He whispered, "They heard us." Behind him, the tower began to unfold. The tower above the lighthouse unfurled like a flower of glass and bone, its petals revealing a swirling vortex of color and silence, rotating in impossible directions. Ron stared up, eyes wide, his antenna now gently retracted into his spine. The glow faded. He was himself again. But something waited beyond the opening. Not a creature, but a presence. A space that wasn't a place, shaped exactly like understanding. The voice returned, softer than before. The transmission was successful. Those aligned may pass. And from the shore below, people began to appear. Silent. Drawn, not by force, but by resonance. Old sailors, lost children, sleepless wanderers, all walking slowly toward the lighthouse, then up the spiral stairs. Ron stepped aside. He didn't stop them. He just watched as the first woman touched the edge of the tower's light and vanished. Not disappeared, but translated. One by one, they passed through the light. Each person who entered the tower shimmered, then dissolved into delicate threads of color, drifting upward like smoke laced with memory. There was no pain, no sound, only completion. Ron stood at the threshold now. Behind him, the lighthouse beacon dimmed for the first time in centuries. No more signal, no more warning, only peace. He looked out across the ocean. The massive receiver being, the thing that had waited so long, began to collapse gently into itself, like a wave retreating after a long breath. It had heard the message. It had delivered the response. Above, the tower pulsed one final time. All translations complete. Signal closing. Thank you for listening. And then, the light vanished. So did the tower. And the lighthouse fell into a silence it hadn't known since it was born. Ron descended the lighthouse stairs alone. No one else remained. The fog had lifted. The ocean was still. Birds returned to the sky like punctuation after a long sentence. And yet, something lingered in the air. A frequency just beyond hearing, like a song you almost remember from childhood. He paused beside the old radio. Dust settled on the dials. Silent now. Harmless. But as his hand brushed the microphone, he felt it. A memory not his own. A shipwreck. A drowning man. A whisper from the dark. Build something. That listens back. Ron understood. The lighthouse was never a tool of warning. It was a reply. Constructed ages ago, repurposed through generations, its true function forgotten, but never silenced. He looked up once more. There was no tower now, but above, in the clouds, a single phrase shimmered faintly. Echo received. Ron stood at the base of the lighthouse, staring at the sea. No tower, no signal, no pulse in his spine. Only a quiet breeze, gulls in the distance, and the steady breath of the earth, as if the planet itself had exhaled. He walked inland slowly, passing abandoned radios, their circuits finally still. Everywhere he looked, the world seemed lighter. Like a room after someone stopped speaking, not empty, but peaceful. People would come eventually. Ask questions. They would see the beacon extinguished, feel the silence. They would call it a mystery, a miracle, a hoax. But Ron would know the truth. He wasn't chosen. He was simply in range. And for a moment, for just one impossible breath in time, the universe used him to speak back, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to say softly, "We heard you too.